everybody, Trevor here, and welcome to a brand new Top 5 video. I know it's not Independence Day, but I recently got a birthday request by this user named Randomness Etc, and he wanted me to do a top video on one of these topics. But to make this easier, I thought I'd do a top 5 American states because I love my home country of the United States of America, even though it's not perfect, but it's definitely better than some countries. No offense. Anyways, for this list, I'm only going to include states that I either used to live in or states that I visited. However, I won't include the state that I currently live in because it's personal and I don't want anyone to know exactly where I live. Now, without further ado, let's take a trip to these 5 states, shall we? Oh, and happy birthday to Randomness Etc. Number 5 is California. Ah, California, the Golden State. The famous and popular place where you can find your favorite attractions like Disneyland, SeaWorld, Legoland, and many more. Fun fact, I was actually born in San Ramon, California in 1991, which explains why I have this normal American accent, and I only lived there for a few years until 1995. That's one reason why this is number 5. The second reason is that while California is a fun state to visit, it does have a lot of major problems such as earthquakes, busy traffic, and a lot of rude people, just like any other crowded place, and not to mention the heat. But other than those flaws, I enjoy California for its vacation resorts and historical stuff. I even have a lot of family members who live there, which is why we sometimes go to California just to see them. Number 4 is South Dakota. This is my second favorite US state in terms of the western region. This is the state where you can find Mount Rushmore, the Black Hills Central Railroad, and the Presidential Wax Museum, which I have all been to with my parents. I've even made a video on this trip a long time ago, as well as a shortened edited version where I left out the filler shots. I suggest you go check the video out on my channel if you haven't yet. When I was a kid, my family had no idea if there was a train ride near Mount Rushmore, which was why we missed it, but thankfully years later as an adult, I got the chance to visit the Black Hills Central Railroad before we moved to Kansas a year later. Speaking of which, the 1880 train ride was my most favorite part of the trip, with Mount Rushmore coming at a close second. After all, I am a train buff. Number 3, Colorado. I decided to make Colorado as number 3 because it has some of the most beautiful scenic and historical narrow gauge railroads, including the Durango and Silverton one, which I have yet to visit. And so far, the one and only Colorado railroad I've ever visited was the Georgetown Loop Railroad back in 2007. And at the time, the famous Shea locomotive wasn't there, but thankfully, I was able to ride the train anyway that was being pulled by a different steam engine. Unfortunately, I didn't have the digital photos and footage for it back then, so maybe one of these days, if I ever go there again, I can make a brand new trip video about it, and hopefully someday, I can get a chance to visit the other Colorado railroads such as the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad, as well as the Cripple Creek one. But those probably won't happen until after a very long time from now. Number 2, Iowa. Iowa is my second favorite US state in the Midwest because it's got one of my absolute favorite railroads known as the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad, which I made a short video about a long time ago. One of my favorite scenes on the railroad was the very tall bridge with the beautiful view of the valley. In fact, it was one of the highest bridges in the Midwest. I also remember visiting that railroad twice when I was a kid, and I even got a bunch of souvenirs, particularly old Thomas toys back then, and one of those shopping trips was for my upcoming 9th birthday at the time. Ah, those were the days. So overall, the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad was the reason why Iowa is number 2. I highly recommend you visit this place if you haven't already. Before I get to my number 1 pick, I just want to give a few honorable mentions. Nevada. Fun fact, I used to live in Las Vegas, Nevada from 1995 to 2000, and let's just say it wasn't as nostalgic as I remembered. Sure, it's not all bad, but I've been to better communities than this. Florida. It would have been number 5 because of the hurricane issues, which is why I'm thankful to never live there in the first place. But hey, like California, it does have some awesome attractions like Walt Disney World, which was great back in my youth, but nowadays, it sucks thanks to the outrageous prices that were completely unnecessary, as well as Bob Iger's corruption. Kansas. Don't get me wrong, I like Kansas, and I used to live there for a few years. In fact, it's the place where I've met my friend Dax Dibburn. But it would have been number one on the list because I moved there just to be with my sister and brother in law as the single uncle to help raise their kids. And it's also where our parents passed away, which was very sad. So that's why it would have been higher on the list. And my number one most favorite American state of all time is Minnesota. Ah, good old Minnesota, the state of 1,000 lakes. This is number one on the list mainly because it is the state where my sister and I grew up in the most. We lived there from 2000 to early 2019. One of my favorite vacation spots in Minnesota was Duluth, where you can find the North Shore Scenic Railroad, as well as the Lake Superior Railroad Museum and the aquarium. Man, I should make videos on those one of these days, if I ever visit those places again. Unfortunately, little did we know that there is another railroad in Two Harbors, Minnesota, which is north of Duluth. This one is known as the Lake Superior Railroad, and it also has operating steam engines. So yeah, we never had a chance to visit it, but that's okay, at least we get to ride on the trains in downtown Duluth plenty of times in the past. Another fun attraction in Minnesota was the Science Museum in St. Paul. This is where I used to buy Amazing Animals VHS tapes at the gift shop. Man, that show is criminally underrated. I don't understand why it didn't get a DVD release in the first place. But overall, Minnesota deserves the number one spot not only for its attractions, but also because it's the state I grew up in the most as a kid and teenager. You know, I really miss my childhood. It wasn't perfect, but it was more fun and nostalgic than the current decade we live in. Anyways, let me know in the comment section below on which states in America are your favorite. Do you agree with my list, or do you have your own personal preference? And if your favorite state isn't on here, then I'm dreadfully sorry about that. This is Trevor Davis, signing off and saying, Happy birthday to Randomness Etc.